Welcome to Two Trick Pony, a twice-monthly podcast where we explore all the ways that people have found and cultivated their second tricks, from drag to drag racing and everything in between. We are your hosts. I'm Melissa Betters.
And I'm Claire Ma, and we thank you for joining us. Each week, we invite guests onto the show who have broken away from the expectations of their training, education, or CV to find fulfilling hobbies or even entirely new careers.
We take a look at how cultivating a multifaceted self can lead you to community, connection, and confidence.
This week, we're going to be joined by Tommy Zoppa, or better known in Washington, D.C. as Tammy Kay Queen. Tammy Kay performs every month at the Trade Bar in D.C. in the only fully spoken word drag show in the city. Before their return to drag and organizing nightlife, Tommy worked with the Red Cross and taught cultural competency in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs for international aid and tech.
Before we turn to today's interview, let's dig into a brief history on the art of drag. Drag is a type of performance art that uses clothing, makeup, and other aspects of performance to play with gender expression. Drag artists often portray exaggerated versions of femininity, called drag queens, or masculinity, called drag kings. It's important to highlight that drag can be performed by anyone, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation.
Drag, in many ways, is as old as theater itself. In early theater traditions, like those of ancient Greece or of Shakespeare, women were not allowed to act on stage. Instead, male actors were cast to play female roles, dressing up and acting as women. Where the term drag actually comes from is not agreed upon. Some believe the term comes from how women's skirts drag across the floor, while others believe it to be shorthand for the phrase dressed as a girl.
In the 20th century, drag became a popular component of vaudeville acts in the early 1900s. Julian L. Tinge, Ray Bourbon, and Bert Savoy were all drag performers from this time period who gained passionate fan bases. At a time when gender roles were being strictly enforced within society, such as opposition to the women's suffrage movement, drag became a way for men to rebel against the expectations of society and to play with their gender expression. Vaudeville is where we see a lot of the modern-day hallmarks of drag performance emerge, such as having signature character looks, heavy, feminizing makeup, and elaborate costuming. However, vaudeville theaters began to decline in the 1930s with the rise of film, as well as in the face of the Great Depression. Public appearances of drag further declined with the passage of the Hays Code in 1934, which was a code of conduct adopted by the Motion Picture Association that dictated what should and should not be shown in films. In response, drag performers moved underground and out of the mainstream.
Drag would eventually make a comeback following World War II and the popularity of Arthur Blake, a drag queen who performed in both gay and mainstream nightclubs in the 40s and 50s.
And speaking of good neighbors, here comes Betty Davis. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
He became famous for his impersonations of popular women of the day, including Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis, and even First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. His impressions were so popular that he was even invited to perform for the First Lady herself at the White House.
Not everyone was so lucky, though. Homosexuality was still being criminalized in some states in the US all the way up until 2003. And throughout the 1950s and 60s, gay and lesbian bars throughout the country were frequently raided by police. This tension came to a head in the infamous Stonewall protests that erupted in New York City in 1969, when police raided the Stonewall Inn, a popular gay bar in Lower Manhattan. The patrons, which included early transgender activists Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, fought back, inciting civil unrest and sparking a new wave of the LGBTQ+ movement. By the 1980s, the resulting Out and Proud movement led to the rise of drag ballrooms in the US. such as in cities like DC, New York, and Chicago. These balls were community events where drag queens and kings competed in pageants, and they are largely responsible for the drag scene as we know it today. Balls were radically inclusive spaces, but were especially a refuge for Black and Latinx LGBTQ+ people, who often faced racism and exclusion in white majority spaces. Drag queens who competed at balls were often part of specific houses, led by a drag mother. Essentially, they were chosen families for youth who were otherwise estranged from their birth families.
Perhaps the most influential person in drag history in modern times is RuPaul Charles. Even before his wildly successful TV show, RuPaul's Drag Race, released in 2009, Ru was famous in the 90s as a musician, model, and TV personality, usually appearing in public in full drag. Movies of the 90s like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and The Birdcage, starring Robin Williams, also introduced the drag scene to mainstream audiences. Since then, over 200 drag queens have competed on RuPaul's Drag Race, radically changing the visibility of drag performance and of the LGBTQ+ community as a whole. Modern drag performances, popularized by the show, often focus on crafting elaborate looks, lip-syncing to popular songs or scenes from media, and acting out larger-than-life personalities.
Drag has long been an integral part of the LGBTQ+ community, carving out safe spaces in bars, ballrooms, theaters, and nightclubs for people to explore their sexualities and gender identities. Drag can be a source of joy, camp, self-discovery, and even social change.
And with that, let's turn to our interview with our guest today, Tommy Zoppa, otherwise known as Tammy Kay Queen, calling in from Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much, Tommy Zoppa, for agreeing to come onto Two Trick Pony, or as people might know you in the DC drag circuit, Tammy Kay Queen. To start off, can you introduce yourself and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Tommy Zoppa. I am a drag artist and performer in the heart of the empire, Washington, D.C. I have experience doing diversity, equity, and inclusion, international development, and a couple years ago, my career came to an abrupt end with a layoff, and I've been kind of reassessing since then and have been doing freelance training. I have done performing. I've produced a couple things here and there around the city, and have gotten more involved in creating community and events in nightlife.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into the drag nightlife scene?
So when I first moved to DC, I had very little community. I had been Peace Corps volunteer serving in Senegal, moved to France, and I was an English teaching assistant in a couple of middle schools for a school year, and I really didn't know where I wanted to end up or what exactly I wanted to do, and I knew that I had non-competitive eligibility for federal jobs as a returned Peace Corps volunteer who'd completed my 27 months of service. So I was looking around, and the internship that I found that I could use that on was at Peace Corps headquarters. So I applied, and the summer of 2015, I moved to DC to do that. And then I wound up there for 6 years, and over those 6 years, I got really involved in overseas programming and training support, and that got me a job in the private sector in tech in 2021 as we were coming out of the pandemic. As I spent 2 years doing that, you could tell that the temperature was changing a little bit, as we all kind of, I think, feel much more clearly as when we're recording this, and DC is in its current state. And I did not know what was going to be, like, what is the future of this, and getting laid off suddenly from that job. And it was really defeating. And so when that happened, and I had savings like in abundance, because I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I know how to like tighten my belt and save money and like pinch a penny. I was like, wait, I don't have to rush back into this right now. It was this chance because the job had been so busy that I was able to go back and do my drag. That's how I initially just started meeting people, to tie it back into your actual question. One day I stumbled into this party right after Trade on 14th Street opened up. It was called Gay Bash, which is a, play on words because it's a fun bash. I went in there and I just saw these punk queens doing something different and weird, and it wasn't showgirl, and they were just it was just so much fun. And I was like, I'm going to keep coming back to this party every month. And then all of a sudden, a couple years later, I was hosting my own thing and I had this entire community of people, and I put my mind to it, and I wrote a bunch of notes and reached out to a bunch of queens, and then I started this regular monthly show a few months after getting laid off.
You mentioned that you were going back to drag. So did you have a background in acting, or had you dabbled in this prior to starting to get into the community in DC through the parties that you attended?
I was very sheltered as a kid. I had a very conservative upbringing. It is nothing. It's very I have a wonderful, wonderful family who love me very much. But growing up in in a very close, tight church community that I have grown to in my late 30s now, I don't feel as much frustration as I think I did maybe in my 20s about that. I see a lot more of the goodness than the stuff that, made me feel isolated or sad. But I also went to a very small suburban private school. I graduated one of 17 people. So we did not have theater program at my high school. We had we did have praise and worship team, and I was, lead on that. And I also did tech. And there were the ways as there are very specific places for closeted queer kids to grow into closeted queer men in the church oftentimes. And being in front of people and singing and performing had always been a part of that. And I did that in college. And I didn't come out, though, even until my last semester of college in 2010. And at that, I still didn't have any queer community. I had a few friends, but a lot of them didn't even know because I had all my, whatever my hangups were, back then. So moving to DC was the first time I ever lived in a big city, and that was really exciting, to go out and have a bar that I could watch Drag Race at, with people and make friends, at a showing. And so this is earlier seasons, this is season 6 or 7, now that they're on 17, which is nuts. That's where it started. And once I started going to these parties and going out and participating in nightlife and found what has become my chosen family here, the creative juices that this group of folks had flowing back in 2017, it was very intense. Everybody felt like they were creating something, whether it was a new party or a performance or a show. There was a lot of creative juice flowing at that moment. And now those friends have gone on to create this massive party called Flower Factory, if you've ever been to one. That's a monthly party in DuPont. And it's interesting to see where everybody's gone, but our first party was called Glam Box, which happened at Trade, which was a Sunday night. And we had 3 40-gallon tubs of old thrift clothing, donated drag, people's literal dead grandmothers, stuff in there. We had wigs, we had masks. The first couple months we had makeup, and we realized that wasn't probably a great thing to share. But it was basically play grown-up dress up. I had no experience, and not that I'm a huge makeup queen or anything. I like to think of myself as an entertainer. Because my highest sin for a drag queen is to get on stage and not be entertaining. Someone who gets up and has a microphone and isn't funny or doesn't, captivate your attention, you are not really grounding into what the history of drag is all about. To do that show basically for 2 years, almost every month, and the whole point was just get people out of their comfort zone. So we'd put on some music. People would come in and they just had fun. And the party started at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. And at 11 p.m., we would have a walk-off Anybody who wanted to just came up on the stage and tried to sell the garment, like pretend this is the highest fashion couture runway, and it would be me and a co-host, and then we would just tear them to shreds, as a drag queen is often wont to do. But it was so low stakes. Everybody was just giggling, and it was funny. And then we basically would, award someone a small bar tab, whoever served the best on stage. Creating something for the community and having it take off and people be diehard fans and want to miss it every month was really, really special. And it was like the first time that I felt like, oh, I don't just live here anymore. Like, this is home now.
How did you decide that you wanted to take on like a leadership role in this, that you wanted to be like an organizing person and not just someone who attended and clapped and, was entertained?
Is I'm a Virgo good enough answer? I'm of the opinion that if you want something to see something in the world, like you have to like contribute to it. There's so many queer people who took up makeup and learned how to do this glamorous, beautiful makeup. And that's never been my passion, as I said. Like, I'm not going to be as polished as some of those girls are, but it was like they were coming up on stage and I'm like, but there's no, what are you trying to tell me? You were the artist. Like, tell me something. And I kept going to these shows and there would be these baby queens. And I'm like, who is not mothering these children? Like, somebody has to, like, tell them how to, like, command a stage and, yes, encourage. But I was like, I can't just keep complaining about it if I'm not willing to do something. And so I had cooked up this idea. So my show that I do now, it's called Monologues. And it is literally the only time I've ever heard of anyone doing a complete show that is all spoken word. And that sounds like it could be really boring, just on the elevator pitch. But I mean, I remember seeing one of the most legendary ones you can see is, and queens have been doing it for ages, is from Designing Women, which is oft forgot by, a lot of folks for 80s sitcoms. But the night the lights went out in Georgia is a famous monologue, where, Suzanne Sugarbaker, like the design firm head, she overhears someone talking about her sister, and she interrupts and then describes how her sister is not just any Miss Georgia, she is the Miss Georgia. And it is the most impassioned defense of your sister that you could have ever heard, and it's so good and it's so funny. And I'd seen so many drag queens do it, and I'm like, I've always wanted to do it. Let's do it. And then I was like, but what if we did a whole show based on that? Like, really tight work, because if it's verse, chorus, top 40, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, whatever, you've heard that song 1,000 times. You probably know every lyric before you ever perform it, right? But if you're doing someone else's performance, you have to memorize every breath. You have to memorize every laugh, every gasp, every inhale, like every pause, every stutter. And when you can pull that off as a lip sync, it is one of the most iconic things you can see people do. And the legend of legends is Lip Synca, who is really became big in the late 80s and 90s in New York. And Lip Synca has some of the most incredible things, and she has this like old silver screen stuff. So I was like, in honor of Lip Synca as this like inspiring thing to carry this tradition of like the tight lip sync, I want to start like having a show that challenges queens to do more difficult numbers, to have these themes. And so I do a theme every month, and it's very loosely interpreted, but I only ask that the lip syncs are tight and just really challenge anyone who wants to take the stage to do something. Of course, it is a Wednesday night, so it's a little slower than a Friday night because we are rather sleepy town. But hey, my first party was a Sunday night, so maybe that's where I'm meant to be.
Can I ask, what are some of the biggest crowd pleasers that you've done?
Okay, some of my bests that I have the crispest and people really enjoy. Night Lights Out in Georgia. That's, a classic. My Cousin Vinny, Marissa Tomei's fabulous performance as Monica Vito in The Defense is Wrong. I ask my performers to pick something that's like at least 2.5 minutes, so that can kind of like, a lot of monologues stay down to like a minute, 90 seconds. So I'm like, whether we zhuzh it up with some music or whatnot, but I created extended Miranda Priestley mega mix because I pretend to be such a nice person on stage, and it would be so hard for me to get into to be mean or anything. So I used a lot of her nastiest lines to like warm up and get into there, and then of course I did the Cerulean top monologue. Always, but like there's lesser known ones that people don't remember. Like if you've seen the Birdcage, obviously with Robin Williams, and the Albert, played by Nathan Lane, has the major breakdown at the beginning of the film and will not go on stage. And is just like wailing and in full hysterics through the dressing room. I just created that on the trade stage one night, and that like people are like, oh, I guess it's not really a monologue, but that'll work. Like, but yeah, I've done like a lot of ones. I did one from Everything Everywhere All at Once when she puts everything on a bagel. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the beginning, What a Dump. And she's just trying to remember the name of the picture.
No, I have to say the Birdcage is one of our absolute favorite movies, so that would have been a crowd pleaser for us for sure.
So good.
I wanted to ask, was there a moment when it started to feel really real or serious what you were doing, where you really kind of hit your stride?
I don't know. I don't think it still ever feels serious or real. Like, you know, like I think that's why I was so intrigued by your podcast idea, is that like personally I just like love research. I love like history. I love queer history. I read a lot of theory, and because it just like inspires me, and especially when I'm low, this past year, I mean, reading about there's a beautiful oral history of ACT UP that Sarah Schulman compiled. Let the Record Show. What Let the Record Show was the name of an art piece that the internal ACT UP like art collective had made very early on.
For those unfamiliar, ACT UP is an activist group that formed in New York City in the 1980s in response to government inaction towards the AIDS epidemic. They became known for organizing protests, demonstrations, and sit-ins at prominent institutions like the New York Stock Exchange and the FDA. Today, ACT UP is an international grassroots political group with chapters in major cities around the US and Europe. Okay, back to Tommy.
And she talks through this oral history and editing it, she has like these incredible stories of like the internal fighting and the politics and all these other things, and how the imminency of just doing something just felt so important. But it also captures, she captures what New York was like at that moment and what it was like for artists. And I think one of the hard things for me now is having this deep desire to do art and to make my art and to make people laugh and maybe give people a little bit of space to come together and escape from, you know, the reality, because I think like so many people are hunkering down right now and actually separating themselves, addicted to their small screens and not, you know, connecting with and laughing together in spaces. And it is really important to have protest and all this, but I know my energy can't be all flowing into there as well, and like creating spaces to recharge. And I felt really inspired by her writing, but it's also this realization that the world that we live in now is even more not equipped to support artists and performers. And that's what I'm trying so hard to figure out this last year and a half of trying to do this show. And I am working on a business plan as well of what it would look like to produce or even open up a venue in this town. And when you don't have tons of capital on your side, or you're trying to build up, and you're beyond, you know, going back to necessarily school, I don't necessarily feel the need to get into debt or make that pivot, but it's so hard to figure out how to do, even when you're reaching out to a ton of different resources. And that's a lot to say. It does still kind of feel a little fake, and that I'm playing around, even though I am serious and like, okay, how much because right now my tickets are donation based, you know, and some months it's been really, really great, but I try to make sure that the queens and the drag artists that I hire are fair paid, as much as I can. But people don't want to pay for entertainment in a different way. And those dollars, even when they do, they don't it's not a sustainable wage, and it's really hard for performers. And that's something that I've been grappling with this like last year of while I'm doing this show and trying to think of other ways to make this more of a sustainable career, or not even just as a drag queen, but as like being in nightlife.
As you're speaking about this, the image I have in my head is the venue that is in the Birdcage. I mean, that one is huge, but right, a lot of what they're going through, is this, trying to figure out how do we put together the show. What's something that you wish that listeners knew about doing drag?
Oh, it depends on the listener. Okay, if there's something I wish they knew about doing drag, it is incredibly expensive. It adds up, and there is no right way of doing drag, no matter what the panel on Drag Race is saying. I think that Drag Race has had a place in this cultural zeitgeist, which was very, very exciting and empowering to me in 2009 when I started watching the show during like season 2. But there are so many different ways of doing drag that are not this like singular stylized makeup and these expensive outfits. Like the girls who are winning and going on that show now are spending, tens of thousands of dollars if they have access to it to guarantee like how far they make it in the show, because the winning is worth it if you win. And the bookings are worth it if you make it far in the show. Like you can get signed still and make a ton of money. So people are doing this upfront investment. And like I said, if you don't have access to that funds, you don't. And it doesn't make for good television. Absolutely. It's so cool to see these like I'm friends with an artist who showcases a lot of their gowns get featured on some of these like Queens of All Stars. Like it's so cool to see that person not only like make more money and like have people like want their campy over the top fashion, right? But, you go back to season 2, people are wearing, like, Forever 21 on the runway. Like, it's so different, and it's so different. And there's so many types of drag that is so valid still. Like, because in my opinion, I don't care what you're wearing. I care that you're entertaining.
No, I think that's really important to remember that, there's such a diversity in drag experiences and drag culture, right? Just thinking back to like the history of drag, like ballrooms in New York City in like the 70s and 80s, right? It was scrappy. It was people who were putting on what they could find and what they had. And I think a lot of people have this like extraordinarily glamorous image in their head. But yeah, as you said, there's so much room for everybody.
Yeah, I wanted to jump off of this. So you mentioned RuPaul's Drag Race like early on as being influential. What are other resources that you found helpful for you as you started to build your role in this community?
I would say that if you want to explore, and there are many different ways of finding drag, and I think that there are more and more folks that are doing drag in like less alcohol-centered spaces or drug-centered spaces, which I think that is a new frontier. There are more people who are doing more. I mean, you see all of the anger around Drag Queen Story Hour. That's not necessarily for, anyone going to socialize and start turning looks, but like it all started just going to a party and deciding to turn a look one night. And it was silly. It was a Target top. It was like Payless shoes. It was, it wasn't even like full drag. It was just a little bit of makeup and that. And, you're not performing, but you're just going out. It makes you feel a little braver. I met my community very much like it was the, spring, summer of 2017, and I was like ready to leave DC. I'd been working at Peace Corps a couple of years. There was people I enjoyed and were close with at work, but it just, for me, there was like, you're my work folks. Like, I need like other people to let loose with, and I want queer community. And right as I was starting to meet some of these people, it's just going out together. And then, it turned into, in the winter, I said, hey, I'm going to have a Wednesday night movie night at my house. We're always yelling over the bar. Do you want to come over and, I'll have a box of wine and a couple frozen pizzas. And if you want to bring like candy or whatever, like what, standing movie night at my house. And that turned into people like coming into my home and having like that intimacy of space, like with each other. just because like you just started committing to going out and being around each other and turning looks. And I think that's where I met a lot of the people who not, if they weren't doing drag themselves or some sort of like gender play, going to parties and doing that, we all kind of just encouraged each other. And that's where, like I was talking about earlier, that energy that really built up.
Right. Drag is an activity that may be more kind of geographically limited than some of the other hobbies that we talk about on this podcast, right? Anybody can go out and like start birding or start baking something in their kitchen, but there's not always, you know, some of our listeners may not be in an area that has a thriving queer community. You mentioned that you grew up in an area that doesn't sound like it had a very thriving queer community. Where I grew up certainly did not. What would you tell somebody who is in an area like that or growing up in an area like that who may want to get more involved? How might they be able to engage and feel connected?
There's kids in the middle of nowhere who are like so deep on these Reddit threads and finding community through whether it's Reddit or TikTok or like whatever, and like they're actually finding community. When you start having community and it develops into real connection in person rather than exclusively online, when you're actually creating real relationships, and you can be using the internet for that, but when like real relationships actually grow out of it, so like, yeah, there might not be gay bars that you can go perform at and do it, but like I said, drag can be anything. I mean, there are some queens in the middle of nowhere, you know, Texas, who have some hilarious YouTube channels of them just shopping at like the Rite Aid. Like, it's, you know, it's so silly, and you can do with it what you want. And yes, most people who do drag have done lip syncs and, you know, go to and do it in drag bars, but it's literally saying like paint can only go on canvas. Like, yes, that is mostly where paint has gone in the history of painting. But we know that graffiti exists, and that's that's painting, right? Like, we know, like, it's literally, you're just talking about a medium. And so whether you're finding community online or like you can find, if it speaks to you and this like whole fantasy of like using this to express yourself, play around, see what happens, see what you want to do. Because you can only figure that out through playing with it.
So in putting together your monologue series, in integrating into queer community here and the drag community here, how have you surprised yourself?
How have I surprised myself? There's days that I feel really, really good about where I'm at, and there are days that I'm just like, you know, trying to shake myself out of it. Like, what are you doing? Just go get another job. But then I'm like, but everybody's doing that now. Like, unfortunately, I decided to take these couple years to like, you know, work on my craft and live off of my savings. And, you know, I do a little freelance here and there to supplement, but there's so many people who wish that they could have this time. And I'm trying to like not feel like I'm wasting it, but there's days that I really beat myself up over it. The ways that I've surprised myself is that I've kept up and kept going, and I keep meeting new and interesting people that inspire me, and that every time I'm feeling a closeness with other artists or watching other artists, I can sense that there is something happening under the surface, and I don't know how to put my finger on it. And on the best days, those days that I really am surprising myself, it's like you can feel a pulse of these artists and queer people around the city who are trying to break through and say something. And I don't exactly know what that collective is, but there's days that I just feel closer to it. And those are the days that I'm like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is like my town. These are my people. This is my community. And like running away from that would break my heart. To this day, from the first time we made a show and people really loved it, like that was a surprise. To like this day, it just still feels good for things to like hit and to have a community that is like applauding you on while you do it.
Yeah, I guess, right, the concept of kind of the nature of the show is, you know, the idea of cultivating a multifaceted self, that you're not boxed into doing just one thing. You're not inherently defined by your training or your education or your CV, that you can pursue multiple interests. I think it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on the importance of that.
I watch people like lose themselves in their work, and I might have even been a little guilty of that with my like 2 years in tech. It felt like a lot of it I was just like having to self-manage, and I really just wanted to prove that I was the right person that they needed to get for the job. But in the end, that didn't matter because the politics, squeezed me out of it anyway. Finding something that you're passionate about that like scratches that little like that passionate space inside of you. There's a great essay by Audre Lorde talking about what it means to feel pleasure, what it means to need this. She talks about having this margarine during the war, and they would have a little yellow food coloring dye that you would have to pop in the plastic bag, and you would have to knead the yellow throughout the white oil so it would come out as yellow, like looking more like butter. And she remembers like viscerally as a little girl pinching that little yellow and pushing it through, and how good it just felt like to do that. And that just like, even as a kid, knowing like, why did that feel good, right? But what she did is she touched something and you can't undo it. There are passions that are within you that might still be just like locked up, and you can only unlock those by playing and trying out something new. And I wish I saw more people actively doing that. So I just wish that more people would like just play, find out, like do some new things. Like if you don't like it, you don't like it. You don't have to go back and try it again. But like if something like there is going to be something that gives you just pleasure for the sake of pleasure, not for, pay. And find that, and who knows, if you pursue it, you could turn that into something completely different.
So before we let you go, we're going to turn to our last questions in the interview, which are rapid fire questions. So these are questions that you should answer relatively quickly with just a few short words. Any questions?
No, go ahead.
The first one is Brooklyn or Boston accent?
Brooklyn.
Dream monologue to perform.
Oh, I have this idea, and I'm blanking on the movie right now, but it's Nicole Kidman, and she goes into the theater, and she has to sit down, and the movie's playing, but she doesn't say anything, and it's like 3 minutes of just eye expressions. I think that is a little nuts. It's not a monologue, but I think it would goop people.
I think you're thinking of the AMC Theaters commercial.
Oh, no, I did that one.
Okay.
Name one tool that you use that you are unreasonably and emotionally attached to.
Oh, I hate that I'm going to say this, but Canva Pro. It's so helpful.
What would be the ultimate gift to buy somebody who's into drag?
Silicone hip pads if they're looking for hips. If not hips and they're looking for a chest piece, a nice silicone chest piece.
What is a fun fact about drag that you think most people probably don't know?
It's so sweaty. It's so sweaty. Synthetic wigs are like 14 Carhartt hats on your head.
Maybe that's why there's so much makeup you can't tell at all.
Yes.
What's the next thing that you'd like to learn in your field?
Lighting design. Lighting design can make or break a show. I love lighting. And it's a whole other world.
I can see that you used to work in tech.
And finally, do you have any last words of wisdom that you would like to share?
Rapid fire, of course I'm blanking. I would say pursue your pleasure. If you are finding something that makes you happy, even in the bleakest of times, do that, and you will find other people along the way. Deeply, deeply pursue your pleasure. And it is going to be so important over these next couple years that we are grounded in the things that make us joyful and happy.
Where can people find you and your work?
All right, yeah. So Monologues is the second Wednesdays at Trade, which is in the Logan Circle neighborhood of Washington, D.C. The show is on at 7:30 on second Wednesdays, and we are the only drag show that starts on time and gets you out by 9 o'clock p.m. I don't think any drag show anywhere can say that. And if you want to find me on Instagram, you can follow me at Tammy Kay Queen. That's TammyKay Queen. And that's where I post my flyers, stuff for my shows. Yeah.
So thank you again, Tommy Zoppa, or better known as Tammy Kay Queen in the DC drag circuit. Thank you so much for coming onto Two Trick Pony. I had a really fun time with this conversation.
It was so nice to meet the both of you, and I can't wait to see what you do with this passion project.
Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in this week. We will be back for our next episode in 2 weeks.
If you want to get in touch with us, or if you know a Two Trick Pony who would be a great fit for the show, please let us know by email at twotrickponypodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Two Trick Pony Podcast. Those are both with the number 2.
And if you liked this podcast, please rate us and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.